And here we are, we have liftoff. Welcome everyone. I'm Emily Sanford, and the other host here is Dorianne Emerton tonight, and I'll introduce the rest of us very shortly, but welcome to joining us here at Brockton Writers Series, courtesy of Ephemera series.
We'd like to begin tonight with a land acknowledgement. We wish to acknowledge that the Brockton organizers do our work on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Huron-Wendat nations, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. And we acknowledge the ways that colonization, genocide, and racism have impacted Indigenous peoples, and that settlers have a responsibility in making events, space at events like these for Indigenous voices. And we in Brockton are committed to programming Indigenous voices and voices of Black people and other people of color, and people in other underrepresented groups. We all share a responsibility, you, us, all of us share a responsibility to critically understand and challenge forces of systemic oppression. For many of us, this includes recognition of how our ancestors of settlers have contributed to these colonial legacies, both with silences and with actions. And even today, there are actions you can take, even if you don't feel comfortable going out into the streets and protesting during a pandemic. You can write your politicians, you can pay attention and boost the voices of underrepresented people, and you can pay attention to what's happening in Canada, and not just focus on the circus that is to the south of us, because we have our own structural and systemic racism problems here too. Thank you very much to Ephemera series for hosting us on your online platform. Their next event is next Wednesday, January 20th. Please check it out. I'll be there, so I'll see you in the comments. Tonight, as usual, we have a guest speaker with a brief Q&A, and then our 4 readers, followed by a group Q&A for all of them. Each presentation will be a little shorter than when we were in person, and we will skip the break, so it'll be a shortened Brockton. Please type your questions into the YouTube chat box as they occur to you. There is a bit of a time lag, so when they occur to you is the time to strike, not waiting till the end. We will collect them all to ask during the Q&As. Thank you all for being here. I don't think I said my name. I'm Dorianne Emerton. Emily, I believe you're on mute.
Thank you. I'll try again. Brockton Writers Series was founded in November 2009, which means we've been bringing literary goodness to Toronto for over a decade. Our Brockton Writers Series volunteers are Hannah Amdemichael, Nancy K. Clark, Dorianne Emerton, Sonia Patare, and I'm Emily Sanford. We have the pleasure of working together to keep the Brockton Writers Series going. If you want to join us, there's room. Check in with one of us after the readings. We'd love to hear from you. We would like to acknowledge with deep thanks the continued support of the Ontario Arts Council, who make this series possible. During these pandemic times, we are also indebted to our host, the Ephemera series. Check out their next event, which is next Wednesday. I think next Wednesday is the 20th. I have it written here as the 18th, but I think it's the 20th, right here on this YouTube channel. Finally, our sincere thanks to you, our audience, for joining us and being with us here tonight. So on to the show. Tonight's guest speaker is Deanna Rader, who will speak to us about supporting Indigenous authors, from the archives to the Indigenous Voices Awards. Please type in any questions, as Dorianne mentioned. Please type them into the chat as they come up, and we'll have a quick Q&A with her afterward. Deanna is the chair of the Department of Indigenous Studies and associate professor in the Department of English at Simon Fraser University. In 2018, she was inducted into the College of New Scholars in the Royal Society of Canada and is the co-chair of the Indigenous Voices Award. Deanna, we are so happy to have you with us. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I want to begin by acknowledging the lands where I'm working from. I have the privilege to live on the beautiful territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, and Stalu peoples. My name is Deanna Rader, and while I have family from all over the prairies, my Cree-speaking Cree or Neiyawan and Métis or Piapidakustan family are from northern Saskatchewan. Thanks to Dorianne Emerton for reaching out to invite me here today. Originally, she asked how I might be able to talk about how writers can write sensitively about Indigenous people and avoid anti-Indigenous stereotype. And so I want to share a few comments about this, but also share with you just at least a few gestures or references to the Indigenous Archive, which is really where my work stems from, as well as really what's most exciting, I think, is the fact that I've been really privileged to be part of this new initiative to support a generation of emerging Indigenous writers called the Indigenous Voices Awards. So www.indigenousvoicesawards.org. I'll end with talking about that. So I'm assuming, and not knowing your group very well, but I was thinking about creative writers, and of course the term that popped up in my head is often said, so much to the point that perhaps creative writers think of it as cliche, but I think of it as a truth, which is that you write what you know. And when I think about writing about respectfully about Indigenous people, that is the problem. Should you be a graduate of the conventional school system? Likely you have not been well schooled. And it was wonderful, Dorianne, to hear your comments about the kinds of ways that are shifting. And I see that in the recent generation of students. But I do teach in the Department of English graduate students who are working teachers in high schools in English. And they are, solid citizens, right? These are people who are excellent researchers and elegant writers, very committed, coming back to school after maybe a decade or so, and who are teaching young people right now. And they are very uncomfortable about the amount of information that they don't know, that they don't understand. And so that is a systemic problem in Canada, and that I think that curriculum writers and teachers, and I think writers are trying to address. And so I encourage you to take the whatever means you can to learn more about that. Because while we're often learn about where we are, the history of our town or province or nation, it's typically the pioneer history. And often when I think about the main principal initiatives of Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, it was the calls to action, the 94 calls to action. And a lot of it's really basically grounded in the education of Canadians. So, be they teachers or lawyers, social workers, healthcare professionals, to include the history of residential schools and by extension, history of Indigenous peoples, preceding Canada, but also continuing, of course. And so that nobody can ever say, I didn't know. Oh, if only I'd known. That sort of that regret that was often expressed when the TRC was ongoing and we were learning more and more. But I encourage my students and everybody in the country, if you haven't read the 94 calls to action, they're not very long. Again, Google TRC calls to action, 94 of them, because it will help you just determine where you are and think about what things you were never taught and about how to go about learning more. And that all depends on your position. And if you want to think about stereotypes in order to recognize the influences of stereotypes, I recommend the NFB documentary Reel Engine, REEL Engine, INJUN, that lays out the history of the Hollywood Indian. It's really enjoyable in these COVID times, good with popcorn and family. It's got its entertaining factor, but it also, because of the overwhelming impact of American culture internationally, the American national myth of the cowboy and Indian, John Wayne, etc. It reverberates in a lot of what we think about as Indigenous in North America. So often what we expect an Indigenous person to look, dress, speak, or act or live like is influenced actually by this Hollywood history. And what audiences don't always appreciate is that stereotype influences Indigenous aesthetics too. So if you haven't had the chance, this is a big reading list of suggestions. This film is about 25 years old, but if you haven't seen Smoke Signals, I recommend it, even if it is a little dated, partly because it is focusing on these stereotypes. So for example, Thomas Builds the Fire says, in his sort of a trademark lilting voice, the only thing more pathetic than watching Indians on TV are Indians watching Indians on TV. But my other favorite scene is when his, confident friend Victor coaches Thomas to be more fierce and says, imagine you're like in the old times, hunting buffalo. And Thomas says, but our people were fishermen. And it's Dr. Evan Adams who draws on the stereotype of the Indian nerd, in his portrayal of Thomas. And it's a classic. So I recommend it. Because Cheyenne and Arapaho director Chris Eyre created this smart film to demonstrate that even should the Hollywood Indian influence Indigenous peoples, our cultures are able to adopt and adapt almost anything to make points relevant to us. And I think often non-Indigenous audiences that don't have a lot of background in Indigenous history have a real yearning for authenticity, right? Really caution the use of that word in any case, and you likely might understand why. Because there's a real yearn for a very particular kind of indigeneity, and so sad when real life Indigenous people disappoint us, But anyway, so sometimes the impact of colonialism has made it so difficult to learn about Indigenous ways of being that an Indigenous person might go to popular culture, and to find out information. And I think about Richard Wagames's memoir For Joshua. He details his own history as a foster child, raised completely away from community and family. And as an adolescent, it's really a poignant passage where he wants to impress a young girl. And he makes up a lot of stuff based on depictions in movies and books, and not surprisingly embarrasses himself, fails in his efforts to win her heart, actually is ridiculed. And the reader is reassured that because the narrative happens afterwards, that the young character eventually does find knowledge holders and teachers who help him understand what it is to be an Anishinaabe man, and and pass on that knowledge to his son. Hence the title of the book, For Joshua. But these kinds of topics are really common, and it's something that I just want to reiterate, that navigating stereotype is emotionally charged, and recognizing stereotype as a way to avoid replicating it is an important step, but maybe to recognize the complexities around it, that it's not sort of spot the stereotype and reject it, but appreciate that it's a complex sign system. And often Indigenous creators will use stereotype in order to undermine it, or maybe even just to amuse. The prevalence of, the Indigenous Yoda, for example, has less to do with the Star Wars franchise and more to do, I think, just with tongue-in-cheek gestures. And also the fact that Indigenous people are current and living and continually creating. And so that when we think about writers writing, they today, if you are writing, it's absolutely possible that you would write a story that has no Indigenous characters in the way that Charlie Brown had no adults. Absolutely, that's an artistic choice. But really, likely your landscape, isn't completely empty of Indigenous people. And so you will need to consider what it is or how it is that you might depict this, because of course you might whether you're aware of it or not, there is a very strong history of appropriation. History that is something that Indigenous creators have struggled with for decades now. And I don't think we have the time to lay out the history of appropriation debates today, but it's in some ways the problem isn't that complicated. I am a researcher of novelists who never got their novels published, and short stories that never got published, or memoirists or autobiographers who their books have only come to print after their passing. And there's a huge archive of this, actually, of work that needs to be better known. And so there has been a long-standing problem with access of Indigenous writers, access to the public publishing system. And so the rallying cry in the late 1980s were, don't buy books. The rallying cry was, buy books by us, not about us. You might also be familiar with a term, move over, right? And so that's really the in some ways contentious landscape there. But there have been some incredible, wonderful moments. And that I think about the 2017 appropriation prize scandal. And again, I won't give you all the details to that, but it is online, the Alaska Quarterly Review, which is a creative writing journal, and it's online. And in it, those of us who are the co-chairs of the Indigenous Voices Awards have really talked about the genesis of it. And there's also our first year, the 2018 authors are published within it through the second half of the journal. So Alaska Quarterly Review, if you it's certainly available to university libraries. I hope it's available, published publicly, but anyway, even though the appropriation prize scandal took up a lot of airspace, when Indigenous people, with the support of a lot of allies, pushed back and argued that Indigenous writers still needed support and space and opportunity to write, something amazing happened, which is a couple of people decided to crowdfund in response to support Indigenous writers. At that time, it was 2017, I was about to become the president of the Indigenous Literary Studies Association. So we call that ILSA. That's profs, Indigenous or not, who focus on Indigenous literatures, newly established. And our first conference was in 2015. And through a complex set of events, suddenly we were contacted because this crowdfund had more than $110,000 that was raised. When it was really meant to just be a little amount, let's do something, Canadians just kept giving and giving and giving, And I'm very proud to say that the Indigenous Voices Awards, or as I like to call it, the IVAs, correct people if you hear them say IVAs, no, the IVAs, is we'll have our fourth gala online on June 21st. It's National Aboriginal Day or Indigenous Peoples Day. So in 2018, our very first poetry prize winner was a PhD student and not particularly well-known young poet, Billy Ray Balcour, who's now gone on to, of course, become the Griffin Prize award winner and many other awards. Our very first poet to win the unpublished prize in English was Tanaka writer, poet Smokey Sumac. And the following year, his first book published took the 2019 prize as well. I can actually list a lot, really. It's very, very impressive. And so if you go to that website, you can see all of the other amazing writers that we seem to start to award just at that time when everyone was becoming even more famous. And I can say that the IVAs is the only literary award in the world that gives prizes to emerging Indigenous voices in French. So, which is really amazing. So I urge all of you to go to www.indigenousvoicesawards.org to learn more, and should you be in a position maybe to donate, but also just to watch our website on the 21st of June and join us for our online gala. So in 2018, we held our gala in Regina and gave out about $20,000 to our first group of our authors. In 2019, we held our gala in Vancouver and gave out about another $20K. And in 2020, we thought, oh, disaster has struck. We have to cancel everything and go online. And what happened was not only did we discover a national audience, but actually the Giller Foundation, I think we caught their attention and they've helped support us, as well as we already have had longstanding support by Penguin and also the wonderful writer Pamela Dillon, who's been a tremendous patron of ours. And so we are starting to realize that we want to continue to dream big so this can become a prize that will last in perpetuity. And I'm very happy to talk more about that. But even as in my own research as an English prof, I'm trying to get older works published, published that had never had the opportunity. The future is right here. And so I'm really, really excited and really honored to be able to be working with some fantastic co-chairs of the Indigenous Voices Awards. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Deanna. Oh, it's wonderful to hear all the outcomes of that really gross moment. And that it ended up turning into something that was a big movement and something that a lot of people got behind, and got a lot of Twitter interest, in particular. But then to see that it was actually really well managed and nurtured and housed and brought into fruition, and actually that money is being used in a way that can help people and also in perpetuity. That is really exciting. And it also lifted the eyes of some other major donors. So that's really, it's so exciting to see that something that was like a Twitter storm ended up making in real life difference. So that's really good to hear. Do we have any questions for our guest speaker today? Dorianne, if there are any questions in the YouTube, you pop them into our chat here and I can read them out. But I did have a quick question, Deanna, for you myself while we wait. What do you think should be the responsibility of the publisher versus the writer in editing and publishing a work that either has appropriation is one thing, but then erasure is another thing?
It's an even bigger question than that. There is a lot of skills needed just in sort of Indigenous editing standards. So if you're familiar with the work of the late Gregory Younging, the Cree editor, he wrote Elements of Indigenous Style. And I worked with him and Warren Carreau, Greg Schofield, and there was this Indigenous editing circle, this feeling that, we really ought to establish an association that can bring Indigenous editors together, but also help educate the presses to better be aware of the issues, just even on levels of copy editing, of promotions, of every single layer of it. And I do work with Wilfrid Laurier University Press as a series editor for academic writing, and I'm very confident that there's a lot of goodwill, but there's a huge need for support of these junior editors, and those of you who know the book trade just know that this is a hard gig to break into, and there's a lot of training that's needed. So we really need that revolution first in order. I think presses do the best they can, and I don't think, I don't want to critique them when I feel as though there's a real desire, but also a real lack of talent to draw on. So it's up to, and I don't think, I'm not, even though I do think you do need Indigenous representation, I think these are all editing standards we all need to learn and know about. So, or in the publishing field anyway. So I think that it's a bigger issue that has been known about, but maybe hasn't been funded or properly planned or addressed. And I think it will. I think the next 5-10 years is going to be a different issue, but we're not quite there yet now. Yeah.
Well, that's one thing that Outcry can do. It can raise some eyelids. and it can give people some ideas of holes in our and job opportunities and things that need to be done. So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, hopefully.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right.
Great.
I don't think we have one more question. How is the jury system currently established for the awards?
Thank you, because I do want to emphasize that those of us who co-chair the awards do not jury. We do not choose the books in any way. We simply facilitate it, and we choose jury members who are well known, not always Indigenous, but often. Capable of we have some bilingual jurors, or actually francophone jurors. One of my co-chairs, Sarah Henze, is a scholar of Indigenous literatures in French, and so she helps navigate that portion. And we've been, able to really, again, I wish I could have a list in front of me to talk about everyone from Richard Van Camp to actually Billy Rebelcourt and Jordan Abel are working for us this year, Jeanette Armstrong, and so we've had amazing jurors who've helped us, and we really rely on them, because we want what we do, and we want to continue to do, is not just to choose it, but also to set up these moments then for our finalists to meet the jurors and be mentored by them. And that's been key to it. And that was really easier to do when we were in person and we brought everybody in. But we're now trying to use the internet, because who would have planned? Who would have said, oh, let's do everything online? We would have said, oh, how cold, how terrible, how impossible. But it does allow people to meet from diverse places. And if you have, a couple of things that hold you down, you can't get on a plane, maybe you can get on the internet. And so it's actually been a huge boon that we never would have wanted. Yeah.
And likewise, we have you with us here tonight from your location to
Vancouver. Yeah.
Exactly. To the wide web.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that has been one of the benefits for sure of moving to online, is that we can have attendees and guests from all over. So looking at the bright side, right?
Yeah.
Usually at this point, we would be handing around a pitcher for Pay What You Can donations to help support Brockton and our writers. But as passing around a pitcher is a pandemic no-no, you don't want to get all your germs in that jar, and I don't even know how to get you a jar right now. We've set up a PayPal account. So if you can, please go to paypal.me/Brockton Writers, and we'll drop that in the chat, BROCKTON Writers, if you're able to spare a few dollars for brilliant writers and speakers. And now for our readers. Again, please type questions into the chat as they occur to you, as there is a bit of a delay. And we will make sure those questions get asked. And first up, we have Laure Baudot. Laure Baudot's work has appeared in publications including the Indigenous Review, the Danforth Review, Found Press, Prairie Fire, and Wasafiri Magazine. I don't know if I pronounced that right. I asked her to pronounce your name right, but I don't know if I knew how to pronounce Wasafiri Magazine of international contemporary writing. Her debut collection of short stories is This One Because of the Dead. Love that title. Cormorant Books 2019. Her karate blog can be found at pregnantladydoeskarate.com. And if you don't find that compelling, I don't know what will. Currently a psychotherapist in training, she lives in Toronto with her husband and 3 children. Take it away, Laure.
Thank you so much, Dorian. And thank you to all the Brockton Writers Series organizers, particularly Emily Sanford, Hannah M. DeMichael, Dorian Emerton, Jen Albert, and all the volunteers. I'm honored to be reading with Sonal Champsee, Dominik Parisien, Kirby, and in the company of scholar Deanna Reader. So this story arose in the same manner as all my stories, that is, organically, from a desire to capture character, a feeling, a sense of place and time. After I'd written it, I realized I'd made a political comment about intersectionality, about class and race, about women's rights, and about access. The story was published last autumn in Was a Fury, a fantastic journal out of the Queen Mary University of London in the UK. Called Frenemies, this story is about 4 teenage girls, 2 white, one unnamed and one named Melinda, and 2 black, one unnamed and one named Tina. The story takes place inside a Toronto abortion clinic, while outside an anti-abortion protest rages. Voices rise from the street and penetrate the drafty windows. Above their glass panes, opaque from the humidity, rolled slatted blinds are poised for action. I assume that the people below the windows are patients. There must be a limit to the number of people in this room, like in North Korea, where large-scale gatherings are restricted, a fact we learned about in history class. One of the girls across from us still wears a coat and a hat, a toque with dangling strings. Her coat is shiny and thin, her legs above her boots bare. She sighs and says, presumably to her friend, although it's hard to tell because she's staring away from her into space, "I just want to get it over with." The receptionist, whose booth has a sliding window on the waiting room side, opens it and addresses the toque girl. "Tina, can you fill out your phone number?" "I don't want you calling my home," says toque girl / Tina. "For emergencies. When the procedure comes late, there's slightly more risk." Tina rises to take the clipboard, her jacket flaps fall open, and I glimpse her swollen belly. The receptionist disappears into her booth. Soon we hear the resumed tapping of her nails on a keyboard. "What you gonna do?" Tina's friend asks. "Whatever. I'll make it up." She says this clearly, as if daring the receptionist to hear her. The patter from the booth stops, then resumes. I look at Melinda. "What number did you put?" Her gaze returns from somewhere far away. "Made up," she says quietly. But we are in between Queen tracks, so her words carry to every corner of the room. She looks up at the other girl, and I catch a fleeting glance passing between them. I sense my lips parting slightly in surprise. I've been brought up by educator parents, and I'm a stickler for rules. But now that I think of it, Melinda has always been more confident than me. At school, Melinda flirts with everyone, girls and boys, 9er minors and 12ers. Walking from class to class, I often hear above the din of students her resounding laugh. An air vent below my chair blows hot air on my calves. I keep doing a shuffling dance. Every time one calf gets heated up, I uncross my legs to let the other calf burn. I remove my coat, pure wool with sailor buttons my parents bought me for Christmas. Melinda has draped hers, a down army green number, over her shoulders. A door kitty-corner to the receptionist's cubby opens, and a pale nurse with a mole near her mouth looks out. "Melinda?" "Good luck," I say, then blush as I consider what I've said. The noise from downstairs now sounds like the bubbling swell at a live music show. Through her booth window, I see the receptionist place a call. She half rises to check that the window's opening is sealed, and as she does so, her lips approach the glass. She speaks into the receiver. "They're back," she says. The inner clinic door opens, and in strides a man in gray-blue hospital scrubs. His chin has a 5 o'clock shadow. A mask lies undone at the base of his throat. Deciding that he's a doctor, I baptize him Blue Mask. I throw a smile his way, hoping to convey to him our camaraderie, how we're both doing our duty. He smiles absent-mindedly and, reaching the window, gives it a rub. The receptionist peeks out of her booth, her bottle blonde hair hanging out. "What do you think?" she asks the doctor. "Should we close?" "It's not as bad as last week," he says. He pulls the cord to the slatted blinds, and they fall with the sound of a subway train arriving into a station. The room's corners are sharpened by the ceiling's fluorescent bulbs, making me itch to leave. I almost ask him to pull the blinds back up, because we could really use some natural light. But he walks away without as much as a glance in my direction, into the recesses of the inner clinic. When the nurse brings Melinda back, she has one hand hovering behind my friend. She hands me her coat. "She'll need to stay for an hour." "Am I next?" Tina asks, glaring at the nurse. "Because I have to go to work." I help Melinda sit down. She drops into her chair, an ice cube into an empty glass. In the autumn, I had my eye on a guy named Angelo, a 12er with eyelashes as black as a fireplace broom's bristles. I skated through the hallways, yearning to show him something, although what, I couldn't say. Desires bloomed, they had their own agenda and swept me up with them. In November, I stumbled on Melinda and Angelo in a stairwell, behind them an institutional green wall. Shorter than she was, he had to crane his neck up to reach her. She French kissed him. I saw the mastication of her jaws. Melinda's eyes fly open. I'm going to ask to keep it. It takes me a few seconds to understand what she's saying. There's nothing to keep, is there? I'm foggy on the details of her procedure. I decide that the anesthetic she's been given for surgery has confused her. It's the drugs, I tell her, making a placating gesture with my hands. I have to talk to the nurse, she says. What's all that noise? To stall her, I tell her that I'll check and see. I reach for the slats. The receptionist, suddenly right behind me, anticipates. Don't go too close, she says. Last week they broke a window. Standing so that I'm not directly in front of the glass, I prise open 2 slats with my fingers. Below are 2 groups of people. One is facing out, away from the clinic, forming a barrier against the second group. People in the second group are carrying signs and walking slowly in an oval formation. Pro-choice, that's a lie. Babies never choose to die, they chant, repeating the words over and over, steam rising from each mouth. All around, the snow has been streaked gray from muddied feet. The receptionist touches my shoulder. Don't look. But I've already seen. I see photos of dismembered, bloody fetuses for the first time. I wonder if the photos are real. What is it? Melinda calls to me from across the room. Nothing, I say. In her bedroom the week before, Melinda sobbed on the edge of her bed. I'm preggers, a word an adult might have said ironically. At first I thought, that whore, then wondered where I got that word from, except that it was everywhere. She'd already decided what she was going to do. Will you come with me? Her eyes glistened like 2 peach pits. What about Angelo? I asked. She shook her head. I'm scared to tell him. My ire rose against Angelo. I considered myself lucky to have escaped Melinda's fate, except that I wouldn't have been in her situation in the first place. Didn't you use anything? She looked miserably at me. It happened so fast. People have sometimes told me I'm too nice for my own good. I accompanied Melinda for my pro-choice convictions, yes, but also because I felt sorry for her. The inner clinic door opens and Blue Mask appears on its threshold. On his sleeve is a dark stain. He steps back and opens the door wider. Come inside, all of you. An object crashes into the window. Shards like glass eyes skitter across the floor. Inside, to our left is a nook with 2 chairs. To our right is a corridor with several doors. Across each, a baby blue shower curtain. Behind us, Blue Mask closes the door. The nurse tells Melinda and Tina to sit, but Tina remains standing. How much longer, she asks. Until things settle down. I sidle up to Melinda, who is now sitting. We should leave, I say. She looks up at me and frowns. Why? School. I don't look at the other girls when I say this. I hear Tina scoff. Melinda rolls her eyes. You're always worrying, she says. She studies Tina and then turns to the doctor. Why can't you go ahead with her? It's for your safety, says Blue Mask. I wonder why he doesn't have a name tag. Decide that he wants to keep his name secret. Last week, they busted the door, the nurse tells Tina. What about the police, I ask. They'll come, says the nurse. They're usually pretty quick, I say. When my grandpa had a stroke. The nurse and the doctor look at each other. It's just that, the nurse says. With us, they take their time, the doctor finishes. Sweet time, Tina says, and sucks her teeth. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Laure. Next, we have Sonal Champsee. Sonal writes plays, fiction, and essays. Her work has been published in anthologies and magazines such as The New Quarterly, Rice Paper, and Today's Parent. She holds an MFA from UBC, is an instructor for the Sarah Selecki Writing School, and is currently working on a novel. Welcome, Sonal.
Thank you, and thank you for having me here. This story is the story that taught me how to revise. It is called Solvable Problems. It's an excerpt, and it was published in New Quarterly, issue 137. Your marriage depends on a dog, and it's so fucking ridiculous, you can't even believe it. It's not even your dog. Your husband, Jim, is on the phone with his mother, Mary, talking about the dog. It's her dog. A moment ago, Jim's clammy body was on top of yours, and you both knew it wasn't working, but you squirmed around and made a lot of noise anyway, hoping to bring it back. You felt nothing inside, but you can't tell him that. He's trying, so you try too, even though you suspect he's only trying because you are. Still, being interrupted by the phone call versus the times he gives up and apologizes for not being able to concentrate, it's less humiliating, isn't it? You hope so, because though it's the first time he's actually stopped to take her call, you're sure it won't be the last. A line has been crossed. You thought there would be a reprieve from the phone calls and the lonely nights. You'd researched for hours, combing through Yelp reviews and pet owner forums, reading posts from obsessed fur moms until you were ready to kick random dogs on the street just to watch them all freak out. Not that you ever would. But you found the best pet acupuncturist for canine osteoarthritis in the city, and you thought she'd stop calling. At least for a while. But once again, she outsmarted you, or the dog outsmarted you. Something. You don't really know anymore, except it feels like every time you think you have the upper hand, something turns it around and slaps you back to reality. You get up to gather your clothes from the chair by the bed and go to the ensuite to sponge off the sweat and pre-seed before getting dressed. The weather is overripe, thick, sticky summer in October, but the air conditioner is off for the year. October is long past time for air conditioning, and it's too expensive to run. You don't look in the mirror. You don't need to see the gray roots coming in. Jim is sitting on the edge of the bed, naked, his back to you, talking on the phone. He's using his soothing voice. He's saying, "Cola's still a healthy dog overall, Mom, isn't he?" There's still another 2 days in his ovulation cycle. There's still time to try again before next month. There's still next month. There has been still next month for the last 37 months. Mary must have tried walking Cola earlier tonight because she called Jim to cry earlier. So tomorrow you'll try knocking on the door of Jim's study to try and get to him before she does. There's no point talking to him about it. He'll use that soothing voice on you, stroke your hair, and say, "I know, honey, I'm sorry." And you'll be pissed off because you can't scream at him because he's being so fucking reasonable. You head downstairs to the laundry room, and on the way you shoot a dirty look at the clock that was on the mantle that Mary gave you as a wedding present. It's a wooden monstrosity with curlicues, but you dust it and polish it and spend nights listening to it tick. You pull out your bulk cleaning supplies and start making a paste of peroxide and baking soda. The grout between the bathroom tiles hasn't been scrubbed in 2 weeks. You'd held off because the last time you'd done the grout, you'd declare the floors clean enough to eat off, and Jim had asked, "Who eats off a bathroom floor?" "A baby," you'd wanted to reply, but instead you reorganized the microfiber cloths and hand polished the banister with Murphy's oil soap. You can't bear to hear another apology. You take the peroxide paste back upstairs to the ensuite and apply it to the grout. Instead of waiting for it to sink in first, you start scrubbing away. You remember when you thought Jim's devotion to his mother was admirable. You remember thinking that a man who treats his mother well is a sure sign of a man who'll treat his wife well. You remember that the dog was your idea and are still kicking yourself for that. You remember that night, waiting for him at your old apartment, doing dishes to pass the time. There are a week's worth of dishes, and you wash them slowly because they were gross. On a normal night, Jim would come over after his shift, hoist you up, and tumble into your unmade bed. The best part was that moment afterwards, when the two of you would lie in bed eating ice cream straight from the container with 2 spoons and make plans. In a few months, when Jim's lease was up, he was going to move in with you. You would bank Jim's rent money for a year and buy a small house with an eat-in kitchen for family dinners and a big tree with a tire swing for the kids. You would argue over whether the tree should be in the front yard or the backyard, not because you disagreed, but because you wanted to hear him plan. You wanted proof he dreamed enough about your future together that he had an opinion on the details. You'd be up half the night talking about it, You wouldn't ask him about children directly, but your ears would perk up when he said things like, "There's a great playground nearby." You didn't get much sleep in those days, but the next morning you would bounce into the office, vibrating with possibilities, and then take a nap after work. But not that night. That night you were washing dishes because Jim's father had left Jim's mother, and of course, you understood his mom needed him. It was 2 in the morning when you finally heard the key turn in the lock, and you put down your dishcloth and gave him a hug. "How are you? Is your mom okay?" Your arms were hardly around his neck before he pulled away, shoved a pile of clothes off the couch, and slumped down. You took a Canadian out of the fridge and gave it to him before clearing a space beside him. He twisted off the cap and stared at it while you pulled your feet up under you. Finally, he spoke. He left her for a woman 2 years younger than me. She wasn't even born when they got married. He whipped the beer cap against the wall and took a swig. "Mom doesn't even know how to write a check." You kissed him on the cheek. "I know you'll help her out." He looked at you and said, "You're so beautiful." You waited for the but. He turned the beer bottle in his hands. "She's afraid of living alone, and my lease is up in a couple of months." He shrugged as if that said everything, but it didn't. You wanted him to say it, so you said nothing. Eventually he did. "She wants me to come live with her." You remember being conscious of every muscle in your face and how you forced them to stay calm and neutral. You spoke in a careful, even tone. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know." The control you had over your face and voice slipped. "You don't know?" He shrugged again. Your voice got small and you hated that. "But what about us?" "Annie, she's my mother. But I'm your—" You couldn't finish the sentence because girlfriend sounded so weak next to mother. "What about our plans? What about our life together? What about—" You choked back the words "getting married." "What about living together and buying a house with a tree and a tire swing?" He looked pained. "I've just spent the last 7 hours listening to Mom cry. I can't do this right now." You tried to placate him, but he just stroked your hair and said, "He's sorry." He was so warm, and you stayed as still as possible, afraid movement would remind him he hadn't let go yet. But eventually he pulled away and said he'd call you tomorrow. He didn't call. You told yourself he needed a bit of space and folded the clothes on the couch to keep from worrying. You put them away and tried not to think about tire swings or bikes in the driveway or Legos scattered around the living room. He still didn't call, and you threw out a small pile of empty ice cream containers. Then you dug out the mop from your closet to wash the floors, and you organized the closet to put the mop back neatly. He still didn't call. You called your friend Janet, who lived back home. Before you could say hello, she asked if he'd proposed. No. Damn, I had an intuition about it. "I haven't heard from him in days." You wanted to wail, but instead you filled her in on the details. She was reassuringly no nonsense. "He'll call." "How do you know?" "He's not like that. He's a good guy." Then she had to go because one of the twins was crying. Later you wondered if by good she meant good enough. You wondered if there was a difference. You wondered if you had the luxury of wondering. You weren't getting any younger. Thank you.
I admit to laughing very loudly, snorting quite a lot. Luckily, I was on mute, and also like crying a little bit during that. So, thank you very much, Sonal. Next, we have Kirby, the author of "What Do You Want to Be Called" from Instructor Press, 2020. "This Is Where I Get Off," Permanent Sleep Press, 2019. "She's Having a Doris Day" from Knife Fort Book, 2017. And forthcoming collections are "Poetry is Queer," Palimpsest, Fall 2021. Wait, is it the year 21? No, No, it is not. I know time means nothing anymore, but it is 2021.
Yeah, babe.
And continuing on with the bio, not your best, number 2 from editor. She's the publisher and book fairy at the wonderful Knife Fort Book in Toronto. Take it away, Kirby.
Oh my God, what a pleasure. Thanks so much. Sonal, I'm still reeling. There was one line I wrote down, oh, so fucking reasonable. Got it. My first piece, and thank you, Brockton Writer Series. Emily and I spoke a year ago. We were at Glad Day. I think Therese Mason Pierre was reading that night, and you had said, Kirby, would you come some night to read? And I said, I've never read a Glad Day before. And you're kidding. And I said, no, darling, let's do it. So this still isn't Glad Day, but we'll book again. We'll book again. It's all good. The first piece I'm reading is new. It's called The Business of Giving Your Heart. It's for Philip Krimble. If I sound overly gracious these days, if I trip over myself in needless apology, if I fall into presentational all too readily, if I smoke a little, take an edible too, if I insist on wearing a t-shirt during sex, if I remember your face but forget your name, if I unexpectedly blurt what I mean, if I cease to point out cute boys all around me, if she's nowhere near her nap time, 4 p.m., if she's into the well liquor, no single malt, if she picks up a package of Beyond Meat or peanut butter fudge smoothies by mistake, never peanut butter fudge. Fudge. Point her to the meadow. She's done. Sweetheart, walk with me. I've walked with this man nearly my entire life. Always at my side, we confer throughout the day. On walks, be prepared for distractions, a string of them constantly, repetitively, one after the other. Suddenly, he'll stop. I follow his gaze. Know where it lands. Wait, let's sit a moment. The boy, classique, Turkish? Large Roman nose, ears, lips, trim beard, slight fade, spiked on top, inked, a noose. With a wisp of hair above the tank, basketball shorts commando, with those furry legs he loves so. Do you see that walk? His walk. Such ease, grace. A young man who's never known anything other than owning the ground every step. That one's trouble. Really? How can you tell? He would break my bank account, rob me what's left of the things I haven't already laid at his feet, and step over my body, bleeding out. But would you die happily? Perhaps. He takes out his kerchief, wipes his mouth, looks away as though spotted by the boy, glances up again. The boy smiles, grabs his cock through his shorts, opens his mouth, releasing his tongue. Oh yes, he could hurt me. Kindness. Wait to board the bus back door with pass where the walk is clear. Driver doesn't open the back door. I cross the ice to the front door, slip, fall hard, slide under the bus. Driver does nothing. Person boarding sees, wait. Another hands me my hat. Are you okay, sir? That's exactly how it's going to happen. Last words I'll hear. A stranger, politely mistaking me for sir. Hers. Our rental nears Northern Dyke Potland. Did I mention they're nudists? Of course not, bitch, knowing I wouldn't be in this passenger seat right now. We arrive, they're nudists, brought too many clothes. In my hut, the smell of cedar and canvas. A girl squats naked outside the screen door. My vulva, mine, she declares proudly while tugging and shoving blades of grass up inside. My vulva, mine, looks right at me. Yes, I can see that's yours, I reply. She peers through the screen. Do you have a vulva or a penis like my dad? Do you know what? I haven't looked yet today. She screams, laughs, runs off in a field in a world where a 2-year-old knows what's hers. This is from Poetry is Queer, which is coming out. It's an Poetry is Queer is, I have a rather extensive pre-internet life. So how I came across my queer poets were through encounters. And so the Poetry is Queer coming out is basically about these encounters, where we met, the quality of the meeting, what was the takeaway, and they're in 3 little slots: girlfriends, tricks, and lovers. There were plenty of tricks, lots of girlfriends, and some big R's. But this piece is coming from that book. I'm delighted to be able to share with you tonight. Thank you. It's just after 7 p.m., the first of the year, and I'm thinking how long I want to continue. I put on some poundage. This whole mess started. We all have share, my friend Christopher chimes. Breathing, little laborious. Hell, going anywhere is. I step onto my balcony. There's light flurries made magical in the orangey glow of the lamps along church. I light my lantern and a pre-roll, as I do most nights. Someone has to keep this corner pretty. People are out, walking. Where? Everything's pretty much shut down. Sucks living in a city you can't enjoy. I could go for a walk. It's mild. I miss people's faces. Stay home. Don't go outside. Period. A message from your Ontario government. Thank God she's on the 2nd floor. Make a tall G&T with fresh cucumber, salad, possibly dinner. A gummy, sure. She's watching RuPaul tonight. Go to my room, my current cell of sorts. What to play? Red House Painters? Really, doll? Wait, exactly. Deep fucking well. Mark Kozelik's pain is our gain. There's comfort in the familiar. And that's more than I could ever give you. Suzanne, early on. I don't have to worry about you because you enjoy your own company. The fact that I'm accustomed to being alone as a homosexual for as long as I can remember, that's just home base. The strange thing happened. That family Zoom call, Suzanne, Christmas Eve, one day out of the hospital, the one I would have left if not for how much it mattered for my mom to see all 4 of her children's faces. I did this, she said. not sinking in until days later that she is still someone, that this is who she is, a person who lived to do exactly this, have and be the mother of 4. We are so alike. The single wish to be seen, recognized as for who we are. My sweet friend Dre, who made me come full stop, face to face at a party. Kirby, I'm right here in front of you, see me. But to see him would mean my desire for him, for Rex, for David, for Randy, for Ron, for Alex, for Vincent, for Chris, would be seen. And I didn't want that. Not that night. Not my desires exactly. They were in fact quite tame, often welcomed. No. These are the last remnants of being wrong for being here at all. That old viewmaster. I'm not going to protect you from my love. Body, remember, not only all the times you have been loved, not only the beds where you've lain down, but also those desires which for you shone clearly in the eyes and trembled in the voice, and some chance accident brought them to nothing. And now, when all that is in the past, they seem very much like those desires to which you gave yourself. How they shone. Remember in the eyes that looked at you, how they trembled in the voice for you. Body, remember, remember. Is it time? Not tonight. A romantic notion, a thought. Hey, Mom, I heard what you said the other night. Why? What did I say? That you did this. What? That you had us 4 kids. Oh, yes, I loved having you 4 kids. Happy New Year, Mom. You too. Loved your call. Bye, bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kirby. I love that line. I'm not going to protect you from my love. I love that. Finally, we have Dominik Parisien, the author of the poetry collection Side Effects May Include Strangers with McGill Queen's University Press, 2020. And his recent work has appeared in journals such as Maisonneuve, Prism International, Queen's Quarterly, and the Literary Review of Canada, among others. Dominik is a disabled bisexual French Canadian. He lives in Toronto, and welcome, Dominik. We are so pleased to have you.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure being here with all of you, all these wonderful faces, and all these wonderful readings. There'll be very little preamble. This is from a piece that was just published in Queen's Quarterly. It is creative nonfiction and has to do with something that happened almost exactly a year ago. The Final Cut. And this opens with a quote from a poem. Then again, metal pressed to skin, that sound, follicle scraped from flesh, like tearing open an envelope. Its letter, good news. It says, you are alive, and the ones who love you most are here. From Love Poem to My Brother as He Gives Our Father a Shave, Todd Dillard. My father struggles to stay upright in the washroom. A matter of pride, I suppose, that standing. Or maybe practicality. He has difficulty keeping his head pointed up, and he is taller than I am. If he was seated, I might not be able to shave under his chin as easily. His fingers shake as they grip the countertop. Helps me work my core, he says. His muscles struggle to adapt to their new topography. He is some 40 pounds lighter than he was 3 weeks ago, the smallest he's been in decades. 59 staples pull at the skin from sternum to pubis. My mother likes him bearded. It is a rare thing. Prior to this post-surgery recovery period, I only remember a handful of times when he wore a beard. It makes him look old, he says. These days, the beard is more salt than pepper. My sister, Sophie, says he looks like Pépère now, our father's father. He reminds me more of Grandpa, our mother's father, the voice strained by the water on his lungs, the rounded cat curve of his back, how his shoulder blades threaten to cut through his shirt when he moves his arms. At 63, he looks like a proper grandfather now. I'm only shaving his neck and upper cheeks. In a few days, he'll ask me to shave off the entire beard, but for now he wants to keep trying on this new face. I run the blades across the hairs of his neck slowly, as though it means something, as though it has all the meaning in the world. Here's another poem quote. I am not shaving, but I will tell you about the mornings, with a full beard and the blade in my hand, when my eyes don't recognize themselves in a mirror echoed with 100 faces I have washed and shaved. It is in that split second, when perhaps the roses drink and the clouds form, when perhaps the spider spins and rain transforms, that I most understand the invisibility of life and the intensity of vanishing, like steam at the slick edges of the mirror without a trace. From Shaving by Richard Blanco. At the hospital, a cinematographer named Go Iramoto circles our family. He's dressed from head to toe in hospital scrubs, over which rest a large black chest harness for the camera. His setup weighs roughly as many pounds as my father will lose following the surgery. That's so contemporary, my friend Erin said weeks earlier when I told her about Go and the coming surgery. Afterward, we discussed the intersection of writing and the art of documentary, the complex connection between a subject's vulnerability and the limits of expressing interiority, how method reveals intentionality. A few days before the surgery, Go and his liaison sent us a link to his work. His last shoot was filming a promotional project for a conservation effort in Kenya. That short film opens dramatically, with their team running through the bush alongside a ranger. The earth beneath their feet is red and dry. Sparse trees fly by. A walkie bleeps. The camera shifts to look up at the warden as a spotter plane moves above. They confirm movement and keep running. You can see his head through the bush there, the warden whispers. We hear a few lumbering steps. Leaves and branches shift to accommodate an incredible weight. Then an elephant moves into view, this great beast the same color as the dirt. It rumbles as a slow, sweeping score starts up. The narrator explains the rarity of these creatures, that there are fewer than 25 super tuskers, elephants with ivory that reaches the ground, left in the world. Although Savo Trust has multiple programs, the elephants are a major focus in the organization's ambassadors. The hope is that with security and presence, they will pull through the next 5 or 10 years, the warden says near the end. As the music reaches a crescendo over sweeping scenes of the elephants in the wild, he ruminates on how there was something hopeful in seeing them reach their full lifespan and die of old age in this place. Months later, it'll strike me that we haven't yet seen any of the footage from the hospital. from the hospital. I imagine the video opening with drapes rustling, the sound of a monitor beeping, and the steps of dozens of doctors and nurses hurrying patients and stations. The camera moves to my father in the bed as the doctor explains the surgery, the numerous hours it might take. Then we shift to my mother, seated between her children. Her fingers dig into the arms of the old blue chair. She struggles not to look at the camera. Sophie and I each take her hands in ours and squeeze. Go instinctively moves to capture the shot. We make strange, quiet beasts in this unnatural habitat. Sophie and I say something to reassure our mother, and then I ask Go, "Oh, is it bad for you if we speak French?" We laugh, and Go laughs with us. Our father uses the opportunity to deliver a few dad jokes. This doesn't make the final cut, but it is a good moment. Maybe there will be none of that. Just the scene in the hallway where they are about to wheel our father away. We expect to have a little more time with him, but they ask us to say our goodbyes suddenly. It all moves too quickly. I bend down to kiss my father's forehead, then my sister does the same, then our mother. As she whispers something to him, too low for the microphone to capture. I notice my gray scarf has slipped off and is hanging from the side of the bed. There is nothing conveniently cinematic about it. The scarf just droops awkwardly. I move in and pull the scarf off before they leave. It probably blocks a shot of our parents looking lovingly at each other. I wonder if it ruins the scene. Maybe it gives it a note of dark comedy or verisimilitude. The three of us hold hand and aid push the bed away. Our vigil lasts from 8 a.m. Tuesday to 12:15 a.m. Wednesday. We have all the supplies for such a long wait. Dice and cards and books, snacks, blankets, or phones. Later in the day, loved ones will sit with us, but for now it's early, and we only talk and laugh and cry at a cafeteria table. Afterwards, I'm unsure who said what. What I do know is, we're united in our sense of powerlessness. My emotional family, Go will call us days later when he visits in the recovery ward. Everyone reacts differently in these moments, he says. Another family he recorded gave one another high fives as the patient was wheeled away. Like the Super Tuskers, we've all become ambassadors. Go has been hired by the Toronto branch of Sinai Health to record procedures and services offered at the hospital. Over the course of several weeks, he will document willing patients, their families, and the medical teams as they undergo and undertake rare and common procedures. Throughout, his camera hovers as much over doctors putting on their lucky socks before surgery, as families huddled together in tears, on hands pressed together in comfort, as hands shifting organs aside to perform delicate incisions. The process is equal parts human perspective and the highly technical realities of surgery. The short film is to be one of the main pushes for a fundraising effort for the network. My father is one of two subjects for the peritoneal surface malignancy program's cytoreduction surface and hypothermic intraperitoneal chemotherapy. Try saying that a couple of times. Or HIPEC. The program is the only one of its kind in Ontario, and the HIPEC its crowning achievement. A highly specialized procedure used to treat specific types of cancer. The HIPEC is offered in only 9 hospitals in Canada. In my father's case, it will be used to treat widespread appendiceal mucinous neoplasm. As the surgery day progresses, I struggle not to think about the procedure. During quiet moments, I conjure Go walking the room with his contraption, capturing every moment. His camera's eyes become my eyes. Through it, I imagine I watch André Parisien as patient, as subject, record what happens to the man, but only glimpse at who he is. I note the ease with which the scalpel slices open his chest, how his boundaries are no longer what they were, how his flesh becomes as a canvas pulled taut across the edges, the way the light catches large steel bowl next to the table, how they cut away abdominal lining, remove it piece by piece. He doesn't need it anyway. Note the vectors of infection there and there and there and there and there. The many times they scrape away at colon, diaphragm, gallbladder, liver, everywhere. How carefully they deposit a length of excise intestine in the bowl. How thin tubes are placed throughout his abdomen, pierced through different points of his stomach. The way they use fine thread to sew him up delicately. How warmed chemotherapy flows in and through him, targeting the cancerous areas, in a way best described as science fictional. How a stranger's hands press on his belly continuously to help blood flow throughout the procedure. I imagine I am not a son waiting in a room who's considering the many terrifying steps there are to the surgical process, taking guesses at which one they are on now. A son part of a family, wondering if the man they love will be returned to them. I am only a camera being carried around the room. I move. I shift angles. Nothing eludes me. And I'll stop there. I'll just show one little thing. They also have they have pictures from the actual video. By the time that this came out, we had enough leeway that they allowed us to actually include some of the images, including stuff from the elephant as well. Thank you.
Wow, that is intense. Thank you, Dominik. All right, so we have a brief question and answer period. If any folks have questions for us, please put them in the chat and they'll get relayed to me. But if we all want to think about some questions as well for each other, that would be fine too. I always come prepared with a few though. But first, before I talk about I want to just say a few words about the Q&A. If you have a question, type it in. Please note that we'll only read questions that are respectful of our authors and that do not promote any sort of oppression. So, folks, we're all at different stages in our pandemic life. Some are writing, some are not writing, some are not even reading. How and what is getting you through in the literary sense these days, folks? Okay, do we have any volunteers or are we just not getting through?
It helps to have deadlines.
It helps to have deadlines.
Yeah, that's for sure. And it also, funnily, once I practice focusing, focus is also really, there has been early on in this, not the ability to focus was kind of lost for a bit. And so now that I'm in my familiar, and this is my familiar, distance is there, focus is here. So that's been helpful too, yeah. Mm-hmm. And not thinking I have to have anything important to say. That always helps too. I don't have to say anything important. Yeah, that helps.
Okay, so letting yourself off the hook in terms of.
Darling, I'm never pretty on a hook, girl. Hello. no hooks. I can see that hook coming a mile away. I just go ahead, go ahead. Okay.
Okay. Other folks, what's getting you through in the literary sense?
Well, I can, for me, my partner who is managing the Ephemera series right now, literally next to me, she has a regular schedule. We both work from home, and she has to do her hours, and so I feel some pressure to be writing and reading because that is my job. But more importantly, like, writing in particular schedules my days in important ways. So even if it's not always entirely as successful as I want it to be, especially in terms of health and whatnot, I often steal the hours that I can in one way or the other. So this sort of isolation with COVID and that kind of stress, I mean, normally under, because of health, the most stressful times, I still have to try and steal whatever hours I can get because a lot of days my health will not allow me to write. So in various ways, I'm still sort of doing it in the same sort of way. But I think for most people, when I have that conversation with them, I tell them that just if they write anything at all, I think it's a genuine accomplishment in this kind of state. At least that's what I think.
Okay, I'll go. So for most of the pandemic, I haven't been writing at all. As you probably heard, I have 2 young kids. And when schools and daycares were closed, at the end of the day, I would think, okay, I should try to do something so that I preserve that part of myself. But I was too exhausted, and it got a little better when things opened up again. But at that point, it was just, my distance from writing predated the pandemic, so trying to find my way back in was like, it's a longer term break, so it took a while to kind of get back in. And then I was teaching writing in September. So for a lot of it, actually teaching writing became my writing, because at least I was talking about craft, I was working with students, I was teaching them things about how to get over themselves that I realized I should be telling myself. So that has been mine. But since the new year, I kind of, I know resolutions don't really do much, but I'm going with it right now. It seems to be holding. So if it all falls apart in 2 weeks, that's 2 weeks more writing than I did in a while. So that works okay.
And Laure, what's getting you through these days?
So much like Sonal, I have young children. Well, one, so every time they close the schools, I lose about 30 to 40% of my childcare. In the beginning of the pandemic, it was very painful because although I acknowledge that I have a really privileged life in the sense that neither my husband nor I, we did lose our childcare from a Friday to a Monday, and more money than I do. We made the very conscious decision to took priority over my paid work, and that that was fine. But what was so difficult for me was finding time to write, and time and energy to write, because as we all know, when we have small children, we are sucked into the domestic minutia of the day, and it's exhausting. And I really missed intellectual stimulation in the first few months, and I was so grateful when schools opened up again. So now that schools are now closed again, I'm getting up early. I'm getting up at 6 a.m. so that I can read and write, and that sets the tone for the day for me. The other thing that I discovered during the pandemic is that even writing half an hour a day makes me feel invigorated, and gives me that intellectual stimulation and that passion for living, really, that for me is tied to writing and to art in general. So I haven't been able to find that half an hour in terms of working on my novel, but I have been writing in my journal every morning. And because I'm married to an ER doctor, it's been a very wild ride and a very, very charged, very intense year. And so I've been processing that intensity in my journaling, and that's been a wonderful way of dealing with the high stress that we. And then the other thing is reading tremendously, reading, books that are poetic. So for me, the pleasure of language is what gets me through this difficult time.
So I'm not sure if everybody's done answering that question. Yeah? Okay. So we have a question from the comments of YouTube, which is, do you find you're writing about more darker themes due to COVID? I love this question. I love it. How has COVID affected your writing in terms of theme, not in terms of space or time? Like, are you writing more about darker things? Are you writing more about pandemics or diseases or isolation? How has it affected your content of your writing? Go.
Well, I'll go ahead on that. I think this is probably not obvious from my reading, but like the novel I'm working on is it was kind of depressing, and one of the things I wanted to do in this rewrite, and I'm more convinced of it now because of the pandemic, is just make it bigger and funnier and goofier. So rather, I just want it to be more fun to write. I mean, if I have like 20 minutes that I can write in that's like my self-care me time, I don't want to sit there and think about like dying in a pandemic alone and not being able to touch people or see people. I would like to think about happy things. But I always think my humor is never like, sunshine and rainbows. I like kind of a friend of mine described one of my stories reading it. It's like, wow, I'm laughing and I feel like I shouldn't. And I thought, like, the thing I want to go for. So that's what I've been trying to get to with my own writing in the pandemic.
Who else can answer this? Kirby? You've got some pandemic poetry.
I love being called upon. Thank you. All of a sudden, I thought I was Paul Lynde in the Hollywood Squares. So now I want to hear more. I want more. So could please take those 20 minutes. Anytime you can take those 20 minutes, please do. I'm of a similar frame of mind or cloth. If I'm not having fun, I don't know. I intend fun. I intend the new. I mean, my God, the pandemic, all this stuff, that's already been habituated. It is, it is what it is. I'm still trying to stay juicy, right? And it's intentional. But of course, I'm in a similar place where my writing also has a bit of tenderness, sweetness, a bit of stuff going on. I think that has everything to do with where I'm 60s now. So I'm a little more reflective, a little more. It's funny. Kavafi is my poet. In fact, the walk that I had, where Walk With Me, there's a series of conversations that I make up that Kavafi is my companion throughout this book, and so I want to have fun. But when I first met Kavafi in writing was when I was in my teens, and I still hadn't had any access. But so I recognized the longing. He was writing as an older man where I'm seated now. And it was all about longing. I call him the poet of longing. So my longing as a teenager resembled very much the longing that I experience today. And it's not even a pining or a longing in terms of nostalgic. It's a recalling of what the juice is. So it's for me, that's refreshing. That's like my refresh button. That keeps me Oh, my greatest thing, that if somebody said, Kirby, what is the thing you've learned most throughout your whole life? And I said, I no longer go for my jugular. And that was a huge thing. I choose a feather duster, not the machete. I'm much kinder to myself. And that has, let me tell you, that's a sweet thing in my 60s to be in this place. It's nice to be here at all. So I hope that answers. Does that answer a little bit? Okay. Thank you.
Laure, what themes are coming up for you? Is there?
I choose the machete over the feather duster. I embrace the darkness. My writing has always been dark, and I embrace the darkness. So no, it's darker, if anything. But it has been a painful time for. So yeah, so my themes are darker. My work is darker. But on the other hand, the writing process is lighter, because once I realized I only had a half an hour a day and maybe 5 days a week to write, I stopped judging my work, because I would set a timer. I would put my very reluctant son, so my youngest refuses to watch TV, which I've never seen in a child. So until recently, he refused to watch television. And I would beg him. I would say, please, please watch Peppa Pig, watch something so that I can write. And he's finally watching TV, which I'm very happy about. He's watching an emergency medicine documentary show for children, which is hilarious. He likes catastrophe stories. So he loves that show. So anyways, I set a timer for 30 minutes, and I have 30 minutes to work on my novel. And so I can't reread, I can't erase, I can't judge. I simply write. And some of my best writing came out of those early months of the pandemic, when I was desperate to write and I only had a half an hour. So that was a lesson for me. That was a really good lesson, that I don't necessarily need to revise, and I don't necessarily need to erase. That was a good lesson. So the process has become lighter, which is fantastic. And I think sometimes when catastrophe hits, like the pandemic, we take the plunge, we risk more. And I think that's been valuable for me.
All right, that leaves you, Dominik.
I think you can tell from that particular text, my writing is very light, it's cheery, and I write a lot about health, and the creative nonfiction book that I'm writing is all essays around disability, illness, and medical process. So I don't know that the pandemic has necessarily influenced the tone of what I'm doing, but it has definitely filtered in various ways, because a lot of the texts dealing with the treatment of disability and the way that people engage with it on a thematic level, there are a lot of things that have been coming up with the treatment of disabled people during the pandemic, and those things necessarily need to be reflected in some of the texts, because this really is the crucible for a lot of disabled people in terms of access, in terms of the value of their lives. So yeah, it's influencing the texts in very practical ways, but not particularly on a thematic level in that way.
All right. Do we have any from the folks at large?
No, not from the folks at large. So I think we should move on to our standard question.
Our very favorite question.
Our question that we always ask.
The question we always ask at the Brockton Writers Series is, we would like just a book for us to read. Something that you've read recently, or maybe not so recently, no pressure, that resonated, that you really think we should investigate, dive into, read.
Okay, I'll jump in. My friend Michelle Good put out a book, 5 Little Indians. It's gotten a lot of press and it's gotten very popular, but it's fantastic. It's wonderful. I remember reading an early draft of it or early draft of a section of it in our MFA program, and the seeing it come to life is exciting for me as a friend. And then the book is about residential school survivors and the story of what happens afterwards. And it's really wonderfully written, and I'm also super thrilled for my friends. So I would recommend that one.
Five Little Indians. Thank you.
Hi. I don't know if you have A.F. Maritz's gorgeous, glorious latest collection, as far as you know. It's just stellar, stunning, gorgeous work. You know, Al's been around for a while, a bit. His collection, The Sparrow, his collected The Sparrow is remarkable as well. But this came out and it completely took me by surprise. It's so vulnerable and open and tender and loving, and I experienced a real kinship with works. It's super lovely. It's super lovely. Yeah.
Okay. I see that Deanna is piping up in our chats, but I'd like to hear from you, Deanna. Can you unmute? And
absolutely. Nobody Cries at Bingo, just because we were talking about funny and yet, Nobody Cries at Bingo by Dawn Dumont is really awesome. And she's, Dawn Dumont facilitates between being a creative writer, a lawyer, I think she left her legal career behind, and a stand-up comic. And it works really well. Nice foil for other things. Yeah.
Nobody Cries at Bingo. Okay.
I love the title.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I could describe it, but I feel like it takes up some time.
The title sells it for sure.
Yeah.
Who haven't we heard from? Sonal? Have we heard your recommendation? Yeah. Okay, so Dominik.
Five Little Indians. Yeah. And the AF Month.
Oh, that's right.
Yes.
Sure. So I'm going to go for something older. So I have a bunch of tattoos on this arm from a book called Taineron by Lena Kron. She's a Finnish author, and it was translated around 2005, I think. And especially right now that people, can't travel and that sort of thing, it is a very fantastical, sort of philosophical and poetic book that is letters from a city of insects. So imagine Alice in Wonderland, very much for adults, extremely philosophical, extremely contemplative, and it's all about transformation and metamorphosis. It is probably the most important book in my life, and definitely the most influential. I think it's one of the most beautiful things I've ever read. And a lot of people don't know it because it's a translation by a Finnish author. She won the Finlandia Prize, which is their equivalent of the Giller for this book. And we can't travel right now, so traveling to this incredible, fantastical place, and it also feels very appropriate because their city is basically built around a volcano, and there's always the potential of it erupting, but everyone goes on with their lives and all of these things, very much in a sort of sense of impending tension that we have with something like COVID, but there's all of this beauty and all of this metamorphosis around it. So to me, I think thematically it's interesting in this context, and selfishly it just means so much to me, and I love to plug it any opportunity I get.
Okay, that was Taineron?
Yeah, Taineron, and the author is Lena Kron.
I really want to read that.
Yeah, it's stunning. This one right here is the book cover.
Very cool. And Laure, let's hear from you. Anything you've read?
That's a really difficult question.
It could be a shopping list, for heaven's sake.
Yeah,
This is a
I'm
pandemic.
going to give you two. I'm going to give you two. So one of my favorite poets is an American poet named Laure Baudot. And I don't know if I'm even pronouncing that, but I've reread her books several times in the last decade. And one of my favorites is called Space in Chains. I'll write her name in the chat because it's strange spelling. But her poetry is extremely fragmented. It's set in a domestic setting, so that's close to my heart. But also she revels in the pleasure of language. So it's gorgeous. And then I've recently reread Knausgaard's My Struggle, which of course is appropriately dark, wonderfully dark. The first of his autobiographical series. So what I love is that he delves equally into huge philosophical questions and also his domestic experience of raising several children. So he's fantastic as well. That's Knausgaard's My Struggle.
Okay, so My Struggle and Space in Chains. Yes, embrace the darkness indeed.
Yeah, I embrace it. I embrace it. I acknowledge it.
Yeah, attract on current affairs.
There's a theme.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're all happy-go-lucky, children of the grass right now.
Yeah.
I laughed a lot tonight. I did. It was just not bringing enough clothes to a nudist party and awful husbands. I don't know what to say.
Yeah. What a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful group of people. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. So to close out the evening, I want to once again thank Ephemera for hosting us. We really wouldn't be here without them. Thank the Ontario Arts Council. Thank Nick and Sonal for being here with us tonight. Thank our volunteers, me and Emily and I, if you want to be, grammar green, but we also have behind the scenes volunteers, Hannah, Nancy, and Sonia, who are a crucial part of our team. So thank you very much to them as well.
It takes a village.
It really, that phrase is about raising children, but it's really about raising everything. And there are those of us who are raising many things right now, and not really sure how long we can keep it up. There's a vaccine, people. There's a vaccine. It's coming. It's coming. I'm looking at the hope. My eyes are fixed on the eventual vaccine. Anyway, thank you, everybody, again. Our next Brockton, which will probably be online, because we've seen what the vaccine rollout is, haven't we? And March is not when this is over. So in March, please meet us here again at the Ephemera YouTube channel, where we will be, we'll have a guest talk from Jen Sufeng Lee, who's wonderful. We'll have readings from Gav Jones, Andrew Wilmot, and a couple of other people who we will confirm shortly. It will be great. It will be March 10th, 2021. So put that in your calendars. March 10th, 2021. And I hope we will see you then. A reminder to please give us money if you can at our PayPal site. And I wish you all hope, harmony, and restful nights of sleep. Until then.
Thank you. Bye. Good night.